about how I came to write this book. At the time I embarked on this project, I was on maternity leave from my work as an English and classics teacher. I was youngish and healthy, with a toddler and a baby just starting out in life. But I've always had some anxiety about death, as far back as I remember. I've never been okay with the fact that I'm going to die, and so is everyone I love. And I've also always been non-religious. So I went to a C of E primary school and to Sunday school. I never found the stories of religion believable. Many people who are religious find in their faith a sense of comfort, hope and meaning in the face of death. I decided to set out on a quest to learn from other non-religious people how it might be possible for us to find consolation when confronting loss and illness. Of course, some of the ways in which we find strength and support when feeling hard stuff are universal, whether we are religious or non-religious. We humans find comfort through communing and connecting with each other. For people who are unwell or grieving, it is often helpful to connect, either in person or online, with others who are going through something similar. And we humans generally want to find some form of meaning to our lives and the lives of those we love, which can outlast our physical death. We want to feel that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, and may find that feeling in some spiritual sense, or maybe through a connection to the wider human community or the natural world. But for non-religious people, the finality of death can feel pretty brutal. Religion promises a happy ending for believers. Many religious people believe that death isn't really the end, but instead the beginning of an eternity in which they'll be reunited with their loved ones. Religious parents who've been bereaved may find comfort in imagining their child as an angel, safe on the heavenly lap of grandma. But when loved ones die too soon, and doesn't death mostly feel too soon, non-religious grievers can't believe there'll be any compensation for the unlived years and guilt. Where is our comfort and consolation then? I wondered as I set out on this project. Non-religious people are much less likely than religious people to believe that everything happens for a reason, in accordance with a higher plan. We're more likely to believe that life is only as meaningful as the meanings we are able to create ourselves. This is what I myself believe, and I wanted to understand more about how others cope. When we're going through the toughest times, how can we find the sense of meaning and purpose we need to keep going? Amongst many others along the way, I met Alison, who, following her daughter Laura's death, finds meaning in helping other young people in the ways that her daughter could not find help. Matthew, who lives alone but learns to join song with others who are on a similar cancer journey. And Linda, who knows that she is not time-rich, but understands how to appreciate the time she does have. All those between the pages of my book are people who know about the darkness, yet still look for moments of light and laughter. In sharing the stories of Alice and Matthew and Linda, I will reflect on how we can learn to live with death without God. I met Alison 18 months after her daughter Laura died by suicide aged 20. Laura had struggled with OCD and an eating disorder throughout her adolescence and was first hospitalised as a young teen. To see her daughter suffer like this shattered what Alison had assumed about the world. She'd been brought up by two devout Billy Graham converts, and initially she accepted their faith. She liked the way the church wrapped up each stage of life, the christening, the wedding and the death, in a comforting ritual. Religion tells you what to do with those big moments. When as a teenager, one of her friends died, Alison was comforted by the idea they'd been reunited in a better place. But the suffering of the children that Alison saw at the adolescent inpatient unit made her question her faith. She went to see the local vicar, seeking answers. How could this be? Apparently, it was all part of God's plan, and who are we to question? But that didn't wash with Alison, because a number of these children ended up dead. So what plan was it for them? Not a very good one. When Lara died, Alison was utterly devastated, and for a long time struggled to find anything that made life feel bearable. She couldn't face speaking to friends, and didn't want to leave the house where she kept her daughter's ashes. She tried a support group for parents whose child has died by any means, and another for those who have lost loved ones through suicide. Neither group hit the spot for Alison, because if you've lost a child to cancer, that's a different journey and a different loss. And if you've lost your terminally ill grandfather to suicide, that's not the same as losing your child. Alison did begin to find a community on Twitter amongst other parents who'd been through something similar. And gradually she was able to re-engage with local friends who continued to suggest a coffee or a walk during and beyond those first few months when she could do nothing more than eat chocolate in bed. Those friends who don't cross the road when they see her in town, who don't react as if suicide might be contagious, but who are simply there and willing to listen, have been a great support to Alison. Alison likes to walk in the woods nearby, either with a friend or alone. The grandeur of the oaks and beeches fills him with a sense of a place in the universe. There is comfort in the reliable rhythms and renewals of nature, in the promise that even when the leaves are blackening underfoot, spring is always on its way again. Alison gradually found the strength she needed to keep moving forward, through reconnecting with others and with the natural world. When I met Alison, she told me that she was just beginning to separate out the good memories of Lara from all the pain. She told me about her curious and kind daughter who made sure not to strangle ants, was ingenious at picking locks, and loved unicorns. Her funeral service was beautiful, full of glitter and bubbles. There were unicorns dancing around the bottom of the coffin. Lara used to say, just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean they don't exist. Most people haven't seen me, but I exist. She exists. That text circulating the internet, Why You Want a Physicist to Speak at Your Funeral, had resonance for Lara's father, Greg. It refers to the first law of thermodynamics, that no energy gets created in the universe and then destroyed. For Greg, it helped to remember that Lara's energy hasn't died, but not a bit of her is gone from our universe. She's just less orderly. For Alison, something that's raised a smile is hearing about the studies showing that cells of the fetus can stay in the mother's body for the rest of their life. In her brain, her bones, her liver, lungs, and blood. It is a phenomenon known as fetal-maternal microchimerism. And incredibly amazing to think that not only is Lara part of her metaphorical heart, but that on a cellular level, she could carry her child within her still. Many of the non-religious people I met, though they did not believe in an eternal afterlife, found comfort in some form of symbolic immortality. The bereaved parents I spoke to were particularly strongly driven to ensure some lasting good could come from the life and death of their child. They were actively creating a legacy on their child's behalf by raising funds, raising awareness, and helping others in similar situations. Because the support groups on offer in Alison's area didn't quite fit her situation, Alison set up a group herself for parents bereaved by suicide. She and her husband are also determined to help other young people in the ways that Lara couldn't get help. It's common for people who are having a mental health crisis that the hours between 1 and 4 a.m. are a particularly difficult time. Apart from A&E, there's nowhere for people to go. Alison and Greg have set up a crisis service that runs all night long for 16 to 26-year-olds. Somewhere these kids can just walk in and know they'll have someone to talk to. I've kept in touch with Alison, and she told me how she and Greg prepared parcels for the young people who will be spending Christmas Day on local mental health wards. Alison and Greg would have hated Christmas without Lara, but somehow delivering all the parcels to other young people restores a little of their Christmas joy. They'll definitely do it again next year and hope to extend the scheme as far as possible via friends around the UK. Lara still exists in the hearts of those who loved her, in the work her parents do to support other parents and young people going through similar difficulties, in my book. And through keeping her daughter's legacy alive, Alison has found a renewed sense of meaning and purpose in her own life too. As well as those grieving loved ones, I also spoke to many people who were confronting the prospect of their own lives coming to an end. Amongst them was Matthew. After his diagnosis with advanced localised prostate cancer, age 69, Matthew struggled with the shock of seeing himself as a person with a serious illness. Until then, he'd always been a fit and healthy man. Now he felt vulnerable and alone. He doesn't have any close family. Growing up gay in Catholic boarding schools in South Africa, at a time when homosexuality was illegal, Matthew learned to keep himself closed off. The habit stuck when he moved to London. At the time, apartheid was facing increasing criticism, and as a white South African, Matthew was viewed with suspicion. He held others at a distance and managed to develop quite a convincing Cockney accent. Many of the friends he did manage to make over the years have died. Matthew does have a few close friends still, including Ted and Reggie, but they're older than him and dealing with health problems of their own. So when he visits, he puts on his bright and happy face, and that makes them bright and happy too. A local cancer care centre offered a counselling service. Matthew saw the counsellor, and vroom, it all came out. That was a relief, and helped him to connect some dots with what he was feeling. Matthew also found solace in creativity and in nature. He would sometimes get on a train to the southwest coast with just his camera. He'd go for long walks on the cliffs, alone with the butterflies and birds. He remembers sitting looking down at the vast expanse of water, thinking, isn't life strange and wonderful? What does it feel like to be part of the ocean, part of the sky? Because we are, aren't we? And we will be when we die. He found that soothing. He found himself drawn to deserted places. Whenever he went somewhere new, he'd seek out derelict buildings and feel at home in them somehow. He photographed the emptiness, broken down walls, and reflections on the standing water. Coming up to 2 years after diagnosis, entering a new year, Matthew realised, I still feel quite well. Okay, I have cancer, but why not make the best of it? If this year could be my last, let's make it the best year ever. He planned trips to Paris and Madrid, up and down the UK. He was awarded a few £1,000s following a lawsuit about his leaky roof. That gave him a bit of leeway to plan trips without needing to worry too much about the cost. Matthew loves the whole project of a trip. As soon as he decides to go somewhere, he'll be totally involved, choosing where to stay and working out how he'll get there. He'll have an envelope marked, say, Manchester, and he'll start to fill it up with info and maps, information about exhibitions that are going on. Whenever he goes away, he feels a different person. It's as if there's no cancer, no hang-ups. He can just be an explorer. It's wonderful. Then when he's back, there's the project of putting the best shots in a photo book. Around that 2-year post-diagnosis mark, Matthew was having pains in his leg and went for osteopathic treatment. The osteopath was a young Italian guy, Antonio. Taking testosterone blockers can thin the bones and weaken muscles, so Antonio suggested Matthew would benefit from swimming and going to the gym. Matthew said he'd think about it. The next session, Antonio had made a list of swimming pools, how much they cost, how far they were away. Matthew thought, this is amazing, why would someone do that for me? And so he chose a pool, went up there, joined. His first time at the pool, he wore a t-shirt because he was embarrassed at the changes to his body that hormone treatment had caused. The lifeguard told him he couldn't wear the t-shirt. When Matthew told his osteopath what had happened, Antonio presented him with a latex swim top. Matthew thought then, this is kindness beyond. Knowing Antonio cared what happened to him made Matthew care more about himself. It was a turning point. He began to work with determination in the pool and at the gym to maintain strength and flexibility. And Matthew began to notice something different in himself. On a trip to Paris, he noticed how people acknowledge each other. Even getting into a lift, you say, bonjour, madame, and you'll always get a response. That happens less in London. Now on the tube, if someone smiles, Matthew will smile back. Even better if he's the one that smiles first and gets an answering smile. Then he joined the support group for gay men with prostate cancer, where he felt relief in being able to talk freely about what was happening to his body. He also went along to a choir for people with cancer at his local Maggie's Cancer Centre. At the start of the first session, the choir leader had everyone doing warm-up exercises, pulling funny faces, had Matthew sticking out his tongue at perfect strangers. You can't help smiling and relaxing. You've all got cancer, so that's something in common. There are more women than men at the choir. The way the women at choir have talked easily to Matthew about their feelings has helped him to open up as well. He's bonding with the men there too. You sit next to a guy and it's, well, what hospital are you at? How far along with your treatment are you? How are you today? Before the practice sessions, you could have tea and biscuits. Matthew noticed people were coming earlier and earlier each week to chat. A community was forming. It's a lovely place. As soon as you go in, a volunteer will welcome you and say, "What can I get you?" In the winter, there's a lovely big fire where you can pull up a chair and feel at home. It feels good too that you can be there for others who are having a tough time. If you see someone looking sad, you'll give that person a hug. You'll take them aside and ask them how they're doing. Being in the choir has loosened Matthew up. He cares more about other people now, and less about how others may judge him. With groups he's been part of in the past, he's turned down invitations to the pub for fear of questions. Wife? Kids? They may have been okay with Matthew's answers to these, but he preferred not risk it. At the choir group, they take each other as they are, and Matthew feels comfortable to be himself. It seems the group gets tighter each week. When people go on holiday, they'll put up photos on WhatsApp, and they'll stay in touch if someone can't come to practice because of chemo. Concerts bind the choir members closely. You get nervous and excited with each other. Early in the forming of this book, my online searches repeatedly returned headlines declaring religious people happier than non-religious people. I wondered whether that was really true. I noticed most of the studies behind the headlines were coming out to the USA, a Christian majority country. It makes sense that in a country where non-religiosity still carries some stigma, those who can comfortably belong within prevailing social norms may on average be happier than those who can't. I discovered, however, that in places where religious believers are in a minority, such as the Netherlands and Denmark, there's no significant correlation between religiosity and happiness. Lloyd Speckard, Executive Director of the American Humanists Association, has also pointed out that many US studies have equated being highly religious with frequent attendance of religious services, an approach which doesn't measure the differences between the religious and the non-religious, but instead measures the difference between those that have strong community connections and those that do not. We argue that it is not religion, but community that has positive outcomes. In the UK today, only 18% of people attend religious services at least monthly. The great majority of us aren't actively religious, and more than half of us are non-religious. Fortunately, as Alison, Matthew, Linda, and many others I spoke to have discovered, there are many ways other than religion to find community and connection with people who share our interests, values, and experiences, and with whom we can find mutual support during tough times. Research reflects Matthew's experience that singing together can be particularly beneficial for cancer patients and their families. Singing together can forge rapid bonds between erstwhile strangers and can help alleviate anxiety and depression. Choir members report feeling uplifted by song and by belonging to a community of people who've been through or are going through similar experiences. I went to watch Matthew's choir sing in a local church. The evening was a celebration of the music of famous singers who had died, George Michael, David Bowie, and finishing with Leonard Cohen's Alleluia. The audience were exhorted to join in with the chorus, Alleluia, Alleluia. The word can be translated, praise the Lord. Doubtless many of those singing in the church that evening, facing the travails of cancer, shared Matthew's disbelief in any God whom we should praise. And yet, as the choir members stood shoulder to shoulder with each other, face to face with those who come to listen and support, it was clear in the notes rising amongst them that something special was happening. The third and final story I'd like to share with you this evening is Linda's. Linda was 72 when I met her, and living with leukemia and a heart condition. She told me that she'd been very scared about the prospect of her own death as a child, following her grandfather's death when she was 10. She had squashed down her fears, and told herself death wasn't something she really needed to think about until she was a very old woman, around 28, say. By the time I met her, Linda no longer felt the need to squash down her fears. She had come to terms with the fact that she was going to die. She'd had a career in psychology and counselling, and understood that the here and now is what we've got, so that's where we must put our energy. In retirement, Linda has a satisfying life. She has 2 children and 7 grandchildren with whom she's in frequent contact, a renewed interest in portrait painting. Her book group has become a tight circle of friends. Though her energy levels are low these days, she still tries to contribute online to the causes she believes in. She'll retweet about the royals spending millions of taxpayers' money for their private benefit, while our public services lie in tatters. She'll voice her support for those speaking truth to power about the climate crisis. Because if there's no divinely ordained justice in the world to come, that just leaves us and what we do or don't do, here and now. By the time I met Linda, she had already looked head-on at the realities of death and dying. She understood what her conditions meant, and where they might lead her. She'd written down her wishes for the end of her life, expressing that she would prefer to be at home, but if that were to be too difficult or distressing for her family, she'd like to go to a hospice. If she has reached the point where there's no way back, she doesn't want aggressive intervention. She'd like the kind of palliative care that will keep her comfortable and may involve just a little too much morphine at the end. Writing the wishes down means that her children will have clarity and won't have to argue or to guess. Linda has also written letters to her children and her grandchildren, them to read when she is gone. She's tried to get her philosophy on life into a little bundle, that truth is the basis of trust, and trust is the basis of love. And if you think of those 3 things and a relationship between them, you can work through most stuff. But no one person can solve the problems of the world. You just try to play your own small part. You try to balance the macro with the micro, and as often as you can, you enjoy the warm and wonderful things of life. When I was carrying out interviews for this project, I tried not to bring too much of myself into the room, wanting to leave that space for people to tell their stories. But Linda had my number. I asked her about her experience as a counsellor. What did she say to non-religious people who came to her with anxieties about death and dying? I get the feeling, Linda said, that this is a question very much on your own mind. It absolutely was. Part of Linda's answer was to point out that it's a mistake to think religious people don't fear death. Her own deeply religious sister wasn't relishing the idea of the trumpet sounding up there. She was terrified of going. Religious faith does not eliminate the fear of death. From one point of view, it is a very healthy and desirable fear, a fear which kept our ancestors safe from predators on the savannah, and which can keep us safe from threats today. But when we try to push our fears down and away, they can become bigger, more problematic, all-consuming, equally to dwell too much on fears of death, poisons the experience of daily living. Linda seemed to have mastered the trick of looking at death neither too little nor too much. Accepting the inevitability that she was time poor, Linda had found a peace of mind through practical preparations and open communication with her family. Doing so had freed Linda to return her attention to life in the present moment. Before I met Linda, I'd been reading the work of secular philosophers who offered their reassurance that just as our state of non-being pre-birth held no terror, neither should the state of non-being that awaits us post-death. These philosophers also argued that if immortality were attainable, it would likely be unfulfilling and rather boring. The fact of our mortality is what gives urgency and meaning to all of our projects and relationships. But intellectual arguments could only do so much to reduce my death anxiety. Meeting Linda and the many other non-religious people I met, who in various ways were living with death, did much more for me. Linda told me she liked the idea of being a wiser woman, passing on what she knew to her children and grandchildren. I benefited from the warmth of Linda's wisdom too. There was comfort, hope and meaning for me, and the human solidarity I found with those who shared their stories. In his reflections on mortality, Staring at the Sun, psychiatrist Irvin Yalom observes that the pain of knowing we must die can be tempered by our rich connections to each other. He relays one woman's words during a group therapy session for people with terminal illnesses. It's a pitch black night. I'm alone in my boat floating in a harbour. I see the lights of many other boats. I know I can't reach them, can't join them. But how comforting it is to see all those other lights bobbing in the harbour. This image has stuck with me for the way it captures our alone togetherness. There must remain an element of isolation in any person's experience of illness and dying. Despite that, we can bob along together. I spoke earlier about the consolation non-religious people may find in a kind of symbolic immortality, the ways in which the lives of our loved ones and our own lives continue to impact the world beyond physical death. I'll acknowledge now that none of us will be remembered forever. Ultimately, everything we're experiencing, this whole world, will come to an end. But ultimately isn't where we live our lives. Our lives are rooted in the here and now, within the networks of personal relationships that form our human communities. And as measured on this human scale, we can feel secure that our lives do matter. Every life sends rings of influence rippling outwards. To those whose lives we touch, we are uniquely special. This project and the people I met along the way reminded me to focus less on fear and sadness that we almost died, and more on our great good fortune to be alive now. We will always have lived. Our loved ones will always have lived. We touch each other's lives and make our contribution to the causes we believe in. And that can be enough. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for having me. So, just a bit of background about Untangle. We're a bereavement support platform, as James said. We kind of have 4 pillars. We have community, so we run safeguarded and moderated support groups on the app, both kind of forum style. We have daily live video chat groups. We have lots of tools to help people cope with grief. We have lots of partners we work with, like solicitors, therapists, financial advisors, to help people find trusted, affordable resources when they're navigating a death, because it's bloody complicated, and then guides to actually help people step by step. The reason I kind of share that is a bit of context to a little bit. I haven't got kind of lots to say, and it builds a lot on what Valerie already covered. So excuse me if I'm repeating anything you've covered, but I just wanted to talk about kind of broadly how I see a shift in a more kind of secularized, less God-believing society, and how that's impacted grief and death in general from my observation with, so I run lots of our peer support groups on the platform, and I think I worked out the other day around like 35,000 minutes of grief peer support groups. So we have members all around the world. Some of them are very religious and some of them are secular. We probably have humanists on the platform too. And I just kind of wanted to share some observations. So I think there's been kind of 2 or 3 big shifts in our society that have changed the way, maybe over the last kind of 50 to 100 years, we deal with death. Firstly, death is very sterilized nowadays. It happens in hospitals, it doesn't happen in the front living room anymore. We don't kill our own animals for food, for eating, we really don't deal with death. And as such, death is something clinical, we don't talk about it, we don't see it, we don't grow up with it, and I think that's kind of one big backdrop to this shift that's happened. Obviously there's been a move away from religion and God, I think spiritual but not believing is the fastest growing religion on censuses in the world. And so that's obviously a big shift. And then we're moving towards kind of individualism as a society, so looking aside ourselves for meaning. I would say that therapy is the new confessional. You go to a therapist, you talk about your feelings, you try and understand yourself and what you're going through, where people might have traditionally turned for religion for that kind of, and externally for that meaning. So, and obviously as humanists, I think you kind of understand that. So the impact on grief, those things, I think I was going to talk about 3 pillars, so ritual, community, and purpose, which you definitely touched on and spoke about a lot, but and how these shifts have impacted those things and what we're doing. So firstly, in terms of ritual, So ritual's always been very important around death and grief, and I think religion provided quite a good framework for ritual, you know. So I'm culturally Jewish, and you sit shiva, which means everyone immediately they know that like the person's going to be buried very quickly. You go around to the person's family's house. There's kind of a process that you go on that's laid out for you, and that can be quite helpful because it says like this is the steps. You don't have to worry about the steps, just worry about grieving. And in a secularized society, we don't have those rituals, they're not laid out. And in a culture of individuality, how do you actually kind of create rituals to memorialize and celebrate your loved ones? Suddenly the onus is on you to figure those out, which puts pressure on the individual to find out kind of what do they want. Like someone said, I didn't know what knickers to bury my mum in. It's stressful, you know, like if it's not laid out for you. And that can actually cause a lot of tension with loved ones because everyone wants to memorialize and ritualize someone in a different way. So I don't really have the answer. I mean, one of the things we've done on our app is we have a monthly keeping their memories alive, like support group. So people come and we have different prompts. So we'll have like a song or a meal, and people share stories of their loved one. And in a way, we're creating kind of this digital secular ritual, which is, you know, each month come and talk about them and celebrate them. So yeah, ritual. I think there's a kind of hole there for like what does ritual look like now. The second pillar I wanted to talk about was community. So again, like, and you mentioned this, that actually it's not necessarily the religious aspect, but the community aspect that might be beneficial to people who are grieving. And that's where something like a church or a synagogue or a mosque is very helpful because you're bringing people together. People are showing up for you every week, every day, whatever that looks like. And actually grief and death is very isolating. You know, you feel like I've just lost this person I love. No one else understands me. And going to a place of worship meant that people did have that kind of community and they could see who was there for them. So people are increasingly moving to online communities. You mentioned all these support groups. And so, I mean, we run, as I said, all these online support groups, and we find that we have, you know, church-going Christians that come to our Sunday support groups and say, I've skipped church for this because I feel more comfort and connection here. And I think that's why people are seeking out these online communities to talk about grief, because there aren't really spaces for them in everyday society. And I think also as we don't have these communities, death and grief become a taboo because people don't know how to show up for each other. So again, I'm using the kind of Jewish example, but you have shiva, people come around to the house, and then if you go to synagogue every morning, you have to have 10 men, excuse the sexism there, but they have to be in the synagogue. And so there was this kind of, at least there's going to be 10 people showing up for you every single morning. We don't have that in a kind of secular society, and it means that people around you don't know how to behave and act, and I think that's also difficult. Like, it's not just an individual that needs to seek a community, but how do the people around you behave? There's no kind of blueprint for this anymore. So yeah, I'm kind of just throwing thoughts out. So we have these online communities, but they don't bring in non-grievers into the community. How do we help and educate them? And then finally, purpose. So it's really difficult when you don't, like, as we've shifted, purpose used to be, you know, a meaning in life came from God and religion, and I want to live well so that I go into heaven or I'm reincarnated, whatever that looked like. And now, obviously, I feel like a lot of humans are struggling to find meaning and purpose, and instead of kind of looking out to God, you're looking into yourself, as I said, kind of looking to therapy and trying to create meaning in your life. And we kind of cling on to ideologies as a way of creating purpose or meaning. So I think that in some way we're trying to leave legacies, whether that's through supporting others, being a good family member, becoming, you know, being a humanist and helping people, right? Like, to some extent that's about creating meaning and purpose within your life. And that, I think, sorry, I'm just trying to remember my point here. So I think there's this shift where people are trying to figure out what meaning in life and purpose in life looks like, even without death, and then you have death, and you're like, oh shit, sorry. Like, oh, I don't even know the point of my life, how am I supposed to find any meaning in death? I personally believe there isn't really meaning in death. It's just something unlucky that's going to happen to all of us. And what we found is like a lot of our community members are really grappling with this idea. And like a pet is a great thing for having, or having children if you're grieving, because you have some kind of reason to get up and take care of other people, which actually has been very helpful for a lot of our community members. And I think we've noticed a lot of our members now volunteer within the community, so they support each other. We run daily live support groups, and a lot of those are run by members. So, you know, we had one today, I can't remember what the topic was, but a member ran it. It was a very specific, I think it was, she lost a child to suicide actually. And that's a way of finding purpose within the grief. So for us, it's amazing on the platform because people are giving back and finding meaning within our community. But I think, yeah, there's that struggle there when you don't have meaning and purpose in general in your life, then how do you find meaning in grief? So yeah, just some random thoughts on grief and death. But basically, I think that in summary, death is sterilized, we're moving away from religion, becoming individualistic, and that has impacted our ritual, our community, and our sense of purpose, and made death and grief a lot harder. That's me.
Thank you very much.
So if you want to find out more, we're at Untangle Grief on all our socials, at untanglegrief.com on our website, or catch me afterwards as well.
I'm only a funeral celebrant. I've got several colleagues around the room. I think there might be wedding naming colleagues as well. I'm a humanist celebrant. I'm also heavily involved in non-religious pastoral support. And I've just finished 6 years as a named humanist chapter at Hillingdon Hospital in West London, was previously Guys and St Thomas's, and I'm a very active member of LGBT humanists, and all these things kind of come together. I'm not going to go through all of these slides, we have to be here for ages. Is that better? Yeah. So basically, a humanist funeral is a non-religious ceremony which is centered on the person that has died. I think it's really important to say that a humanist funeral ceremony is not just non-religious. I think it is, that's to say the minimum about it. It is something essentially different. The whole nature of the thing is different. It's not just a service which doesn't mention God. And it's terribly important what James said. There are two fundamentally important things about this. The humanist ceremonies offer something very meaningful for people who don't have a religious faith, who don't relate to religion. And as he said, it's a major way for getting across messages about humanism. We've just had the State of the Network report for humanist ceremonies in 2023, and I think the figure for humanist funerals in the UK was about 8,500. Now, if you imagine how many people go to a funeral, 20, 50, 100 people, that's a heck of a lot of people getting the feel and the messages about humanism. So it's terribly important. But as I say, it's not just that they're not religious. They're very inclusive in all kinds of ways, inclusive of people who can participate. A religious funeral is usually dominated by a religious leader, a mediator between God and human beings, and the congregation is predominantly passive apart from responding to the rituals. But a human funeral is much, much different. We work very hard at getting people to participate in all kinds of creative ways. It's warm and welcoming, regardless of faith or belief. And I think we'll come back to that. So I want to have a special focus on the relation between the humanist funeral and the accommodation of religious elements. And I know lots of us will disagree on some of that. It's very, very flexible. We don't start with an order of service, a funeral book, essentially, of course, there's basic structure of arriving and things that you have to do as part of the funeral. But basically, we start with a blank piece of paper, and it's very much what people want to do to celebrate the life of their loved one. It's flexible in terms of where it can be held. In practice, unfortunately, it's still predominantly in crematoria, but increasingly people are going to woodland burial sites, using community halls and other spaces where you don't have all the religious imagery and all the associations of death. And you're much more free to devise the celebration that you want to have. It says that, these aren't my slides, it says that it's centered on the committal. I'm not quite sure other servants would agree that it's centered on committal. Saying goodbye is the terminology I use, and that is a part of the ceremony, but it's much, much more about the celebration of life. So, more than simply a funeral without religion, it is a positive affirmation of a unique life. For me, it kind of falls into three themes. It's the celebration of the life of the saying goodbye, and there's that whole reflection there about how people continue to be present to us beyond their physical presence. So, important to remember as well that humanist funerals are not anti-religious, and we don't use humanist funerals as a way of preaching humanism. I think that's not the arena for that. So we can accommodate religious content in all kinds of different and imaginative ways in response to the needs of the family, except that, of course, humanist funeral is never an act of worship. That would be the fundamental difference, I think. Okay, I mean, this is just administrative stuff. So Humanist UK Humanist Ceremonies is supported in a whole range of ways by very, very excellent training, by the accreditation process, by ongoing support, to professional development and mentoring, and all those kind of things. But that's all administrative stuff. I don't want to waste time on that. I'd rather open it up to your questions about human students.
Perfect, thank you.